Hello, welcome to Actuary Voices, the podcast from the American Academy of Actuaries. I'm your host for this episode, Ted Gotsch, and today we will be speaking to three of our volunteers who participated in the Academy's Actuarial Perspectives and Solutions for Strengthening the U.S. Retirement System Symposium, which was held in the nation's capital in mid-September. The event brought together federal policymakers, leading retirement experts, and top actuaries for a conversation around the future of retirement with a focus on actionable, actuarially informed solutions. Growing attention has been paid to the long-term sustainability and adequacy of retirement programs, and panelists offered insights and ideas for better reforms that could improve retirement outcomes for American workers. Joining us today is Connie Rydberg, Vice Chairperson of the Academy's Retirement Policy and Design Evaluation Committee, Bruce Cadenhead, Incoming Vice President for Retirement, and Spencer Look, Vice Chairperson of the Academy's Defined Contribution Subcommittee. They will not only be recapping the event, but will be sharing their insights on how the Academy can assist policymakers with trying to improve retirement security in this country. Connie, Bruce, and Spencer, welcome to Actuary Voices. To start, I wanted to discuss the opening remarks given by U.S. Comptroller General Gene Daddario about the state of retirement in our nation. Focusing largely on Social Security, he painted a somewhat grim picture about the financial status of the program. Connie and Spencer, I know you were both in the room, and I guess starting with Connie, I wondered what your takeaways were.
Yeah, thank you. I think first he started with painting a pretty grim picture of just our general federal deficit. He mentioned that currently our national debt is at $37 trillion. Just the interest alone on that is nearly $1 trillion a year, which is staggering. He also mentioned that our debt is growing faster than our GDP, which of course is an unsustainable path. So he started with that, and then he talked a bit about Social Security. And of course, we all know that the projections are that Social Security will become insolvent. And at that point, absent other actions, benefits will be cut. So one solution that's out there is to avoid cutting benefits is to take general revenue and use that to sort of fill the hole, if you will. And what that means is our huge debt is going to be growing even faster if that's the path that we take. So nothing that was a surprise, but definitely painted a very stark picture for me of the big challenges that are ahead.
I think Connie hit the key takeaways very well. Definitely started off by highlighting a lot of these issues, which I think really underscore so much of the retirement-focused policy that we all focus on. Behind, these big issues definitely matter. Takeaways for me, he didn't mince words at all when he said that real reform is really needed for Social Security. Our current financing model is just not going to work in the future with fertility rates and immigration rates and the way that it's set up. So some real reform is necessary, and it needs to happen as soon as possible. I think that came up multiple times during the symposium. One other point that he brought up that I guess just kind of stuck with me that I thought was interesting, he highlighted the importance of education in general for the general public, not only to use these programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, to get the most out of them, but I also think it really is important for the public discourse when it comes to reform. So Social Security, I think, as the obvious example here. The more people understand the program, what it's supposed to do, what we're trying to do as a country, the more we can have real public debates about real options, real trade-offs. I think it's very easy for this to go, more sound bites, slogans that don't get the full picture. So that's just one point he had said that kind of resonated with me specifically.
Well, Social Security obviously was a continuous topic. There was a panel discussing it that delved further into Social Security right after Comptroller Daddario spoke. And Spencer, I was just wondering what your thoughts were about what was said during that discussion.
That discussion I thought was excellent. A lot of great insights that were shared. The overall takeaway for me is that there's just going to be some really, really tough conversations. Difficult compromises are going to have to be made among policy makers. Kind of echoing some of the stark comments that Gene had said in the opening panel, just some really tricky decisions to be made here. I think Chuck and Kathleen, our two participants, both highlighted how to really reform Social Security well for the long run, you're probably going to have to increase taxes and reduce benefits. So going to be a lot of pushback, a lot of stakeholders, the American people there's going to be people who are going to be pushing back on both of those things. And benefit reductions, you got to be really surgical, get careful how you do this. Social Security does help keep a lot of people out of poverty, so you don't want to, just be too careless with how you implement changes, but it's pretty clear from an actuarial perspective that, you can't change nothing. Some things are going to have to change for this to be sustainable in the long run. They also mentioned increasing the full or normal retirement age as a change that probably makes sense with changing life expectancies in the country, the demographics. Taxes, and of course, the other major tricky issue, raising the maximum taxable wage base came up. I think both participants had mentioned that. Raising payroll taxes is another option. Raising taxes in general is unpopular, but it does seem likely things have to be on the table and there's going to have to be compromise to get something passed that will make sense in the long run. I think a specific point that I think Chuck was mentioning that really stuck with me was just how critical it is for policymakers, kind of their North Star when they're thinking about reform, to make sure that the costs for Social Security, the benefits that are being paid out, that they can't be growing at a faster rate than Social Security revenues, the taxes coming in to pay for them. So you really need to just align future benefits to what can be realistically funded. That's a point that really just came up over and over. That's a really good point to bring up. Really critical.
Thank you, Spencer. Appreciate those insights. Let's just now, though, pivot to the discussion of the panels that you all participated in. And Bruce and Spencer, I know you discussed the employer's role in retirement plans, with Bruce focused more on the defined benefit space, while Spencer talked more about the defined contribution plans. I was going to start with Bruce here. Bruce, I was hoping you could summarize the state of DB plans with a particular focus on newer hybrid plan offerings that were discussed at length during your panel. Is there really a future for employer-offered plans that offer a lifetime income option?
Yeah, so, I want to be realistic here. Traditional DB plans, they haven't completely disappeared, and they do have a place, but that model doesn't work for most employers anymore. And for DB plans to compete in the retirement landscape, I'd say they have to address concerns about cost and about risk that have driven many employers away from those plans. They have to be understood and appreciated by employees, and they have to offer something that DC plans don't. Otherwise, employers are just going to say, what's the value proposition here? I'd say emerging designs like market-based cash balance, variable annuity designs in the U.S., as well as a lot of the innovative designs we see around the world, have the potential to address a lot of those concerns that employers have had. Benefits vary with asset returns, and so employer contributions can be more predictable and stable since it's the benefits that adjust. And so that removes one of the biggest hurdles that sponsors face in being willing to sponsor DB plans. You asked about lifetime income, and I would say there's the value proposition. DB plans are still the most effective vehicle for providing guaranteed lifetime income by pooling longevity experience. Pooling works best for larger plans, but can also work for pool arrangements that cover a large number of employers, and so that's an area I'd like to see opportunities for defined benefit plans. And these plans have a lot of flexibility around the types of payout options that they offer. They can be fixed in more the traditional mode, or they can vary with investment experience. Either way, the risk borne by the plan and by the sponsor is going to be much less than in a traditional DB plan. And that will increase companies' willingness to offer that type of plan. And they can still be designed in a way to provide more predictable payouts than the typical DC plan can offer. And that in turn makes them a more effective workforce management tool because it can lead to more predictable retirement patterns if workers are really able to have a better idea of when and whether they can afford retirement. And with a lot of the DB plans now currently in a surplus position due to the recent economic conditions, more employers, I think, are willing to at least seriously consider this option. That doesn't mean that there's going to be a stampede in this direction. DC plans still work better for many employers. And there are some legal hurdles still standing in the way of some of the more interesting DB designs that we've been investigating. And the current level of PBGC premiums, which is way beyond what's needed to secure the system, I'd say that's a real and meaningful impediment to reopening DB plans. It's kind of ironic because one of the three pillars of PBGC's mission is to encourage the continuation and maintenance of voluntary private pension plans, and yet PBGC is kind of standing in the way of that. It's not their fault. They don't set the premium levels, but that's still a real issue. Nevertheless, I'd say the DB plans are part of the conversation now for many employers, and if the right options are out there, then I think they definitely will still have a future.
Spencer, what will happen in the DC lifetime income space going forward? Where do we go from here?
Great question, Ted. Within the DC lifetime income space, I do think we'll continue to see some more take up. I think during the symposium, someone had mentioned that about 10% of DC plans have adopted some type of lifetime income solution. I do expect to see that market grow. There will be some more growth. The rate of growth may be a little bit more gradual still, which has been the case so far, until we hit some tipping point or other factors come into play. I think some factors that I have highlighted during the symposium, education is still something that comes up quite a lot in my experience. I think a lot of the larger plan sponsors in the DC space have a pretty good grasp of this, but a lot of plans smaller than that still think are getting up to speed, understanding the options, what's even available. Depends a lot on the record keeper. Portability is another factor that I think with more time, you'll see less coverage gaps. And I'm referring to here where a plan sponsor, if they're adopting a lifetime income solution, if they change record keepers in the future, can they keep that lifetime income solution? That's something that definitely is an ongoing factor. Makes a lot of sense for a plan sponsor to be concerned about that. So I think as we see more of those gaps addressed, you could see more take up as well. So definitely do see more take up of these options. So we'll see how this emerges. There was a recent Department of Labor advisory opinion where they were talking about a very specific lifetime income solution, but the broader takeaway from this advisory opinion is that a lifetime income solution is a valid option for a qualified default investment alternative for a plan. So with that opinion out there, I wonder if that'll give some plan sponsors who've been concerned about this, maybe this does push some more plan sponsors in that direction. I guess we'll see. And this actually tees me up well for the defined contribution subcommittee. We're working on an issue brief right now on defined contribution qualified default investment alternatives. What are considerations that should be thought through if you're going to add a lifetime income solution to the QDIA to the plan. So a lot more to come from the DC subcommittee to anyone interested.
Great. Well, thank you both. But right now I want to turn to Connie again to talk about the panel that she participated in, which focused on the role of individuals in retirement. Connie, you talked at length about the creation of auto IRAs by 12 states that are currently serving some 1 million workers collectively. Why is this retirement savings vehicle important, and where do you see it going in the next few years?
Yeah, thanks, Ted. So as you said, there are currently 12 states that have adopted this auto IRA design, which means employees are automatically enrolled in an IRA. And there are just over 1 million funded accounts across those 12 states. At the same time, in these states, what we've seen is when these states adopt these plans, there's a spike in the number of employers who establish their own plans. So from why are these state plans important, both directly and indirectly, they're helping to close the gap in who has access to employment-based retirement savings plans. For what's next, there are 5 states that are in various stages of implementation, and then many, many more states that are talking about whether they want to adopt such plans. There was fewer conversations about this in 2025 than there had been in 2024, but, hopefully things will pick back up in 2026. During this symposium, I don't know if people remember, one audience member asked about the likelihood of a national auto IRA plan. And one of my fellow panelists said that was not likely. But there are some ways that states are doing this themselves. So a few states, 4 states are partnering with the Colorado plan, and Rhode Island is going to join the Connecticut plan. So not a national plan, but states are not necessarily going it alone either. So that allows them to leverage the economies of scale and having a faster implementation. So there's a lot of good stuff happening and more to come.
Well, I appreciate that.
Hello, I'm Preeti Vashisht, Editor-in-Chief of Contingencies magazine, and you're listening to Actuary Voices, the podcast from the American Academy of Actuaries. On this podcast, we talk to Academy volunteers and leaders, as well as friends of the Academy, about what inspires them about their work, either professionally or as an Academy volunteer. Please subscribe to Actuary Voices on your preferred podcast platform. And while you're here, be sure to be on the lookout for the newly redesigned Contingencies magazine, now with a fresh look, cleaner design, and an even more engaging reading experience. You'll find insightful articles, engaging stories, and a cleaner design that makes it easy to focus on what matters most to actuaries. And now, back to the Actuary Voices podcast, where Ted Gotsch talks with Connie Rydberg, Bruce Cadenhead, and Spencer Look about the Academy's recent retirement symposium.
Moving beyond the actual symposium, I wanted to talk about retirement security in this country going forward and the Academy's role in it. Starting with Bruce and then hearing from Connie and Spencer, I was hoping you could all shine a light on what you see as the challenges this nation faces in this space.
Yeah, so I would say there's always been a large portion of the population that falls through cracks for a variety of reasons. That was true in the so-called golden age of defined benefit plans. It's true today. Work for employers who don't offer retirement programs, don't or they can't take full advantage of those programs. They could be out of the workforce for many years and lose the opportunity to save. Unpredictable events, divorce, illness, family emergencies can create significant and unexpected strains on resources. I will say that recent changes have made it easier for employers to offer DC plans, and as Connie noted, there are an increasing number of state-based options, so that's certainly going to help over time, at least by providing access to those who are willing and able to save. But most of these programs do still require a savings commitment from individuals, and that can still be a challenge. One of the things that feels really different to me these days compared to earlier in my career certainly is that for so many families, housing is now consuming an increasing portion of the household budget. And that's inevitably going to make it harder to prioritize retirement savings. In that light, we talked about Social Security. It's really an essential safety net, as it's going to continue to be so, maybe even more so. And it may still wind up providing the bulk of retirement savings for many people. So those are big challenges. They're not going to go away easily.
Connie, what are your thoughts in this area?
Yeah, so, I think there are lots of good things going on, as sort of Bruce talked about. From my perspective, some of the automatic elements of employer plans and automatic enrollment, being able to match other kinds of savings, such as emergency savings or student loans. I think there's a lot of good progress on helping people save for retirement. Two challenges I'm seeing. One is around gig workers. So I think most people expect that this is going to become a more and more common approach to work. And for those for whom gig work is their primary employment, whether it's, one gig or multiple gigs at a time, really our current systems aren't set up to help those people have, employment-based automatic retirement savings. The approach is so effective, but we don't right now have that in place for gig workers. And then also helping and encouraging gig workers to participate in Social Security. So that's one challenge. I think the other one is around decumulation, spending down the assets. Spencer, you talked about lifetime income and plans offering that, but there's probably a pretty low take-up rate. And so, we have a lot of people going into retirement with these sort of lump sum employment-based retirement benefits, and they're not really sure how to spend that down. So, I do think it's upon us as the actuaries to help continue that conversation. I did recently read a survey that said Americans are more afraid of running out of money in retirement than they are of death. And, while I take all these things with a grain of salt, I do think it's illustrative of the challenges that are in front of us.
Spencer, your thoughts?
Bruce and Connie covered so much ground already. A lot of great points they raised. I do kind of echoing, I think really they both covered this, access rates, participation is so important. There's a lot of research, some of my own research at Morningstar even, that talks basically about, if you're participating in a plan, that's a pretty strong indicator of retirement security. So that is something that is, as Connie said, there's a lot of progress with the state plans. There's, proposals out there to get, some type of federal plan. We'll see how this evolves. But access and participation is definitely a really important issue. In the DC space specifically, leakage from the system is also an important factor that I think definitely people are aware of this, but leakage referring to when people are cashing out or they're taking pre-retirement withdrawals. Of course, there are sometimes very good reasons to do this, but in general, lessening that will lead to more retirement savings, and it can make it, as we know with compound interest, as actuaries here, can make a really big impact over the long run. So another factor there. And then healthcare costs, specifically long-term care costs, I think is a really major factor in this. I think that kind of hits on the survey results actually that Connie was talking about. The bill for long-term care, if you need care and need kind of round the clock, you're in a nursing home, it is very, very expensive. But really long-term care in general, it's quite expensive. And so I think that's a major factor that goes into retirement security that hopefully we'll see more and more change and more work in the policy world on that front as well. And so those are my thoughts. I think, Bruce and Connie covered it very well.
Well, a lot of the retirement security focus outside the actuarial industry seems to center on reforming Social Security mostly. Just want to ask you all, do you think that is wise, or is that too narrow of a focus? And
I don't think it's too narrow of a focus. Reforming Social Security, it's essential. As I said earlier, it's going to remain just the pillar of retirement for a very large portion of the population. For most people, retirement planning builds around Social Security. I've got this from Social Security now. What do I do with the rest of my money? Having predictable lifetime income that adjusts for inflation just makes it easier to budget spending from the rest of your assets. And I'd say, one of the things that I like most about Social Security that I think is underappreciated is that you can effectively buy larger benefit by deferring commencement and then having a bigger benefit when the benefit actually starts. And in the meantime, you can either continue working longer, or if you can't do that, you can use your other assets in the interim. And that makes the spend down of the remaining assets a much easier problem to manage. Social Security, it offers both safety and predictability, and so reforming it so that it can remain viable and so that people can count on it and plan around it, it's absolutely essential. I can't really imagine how disruptive it would be if people were really to lose faith in that promise.
Yeah, Bruce, I agree with you. So, Ted, to your question, I would say, yes, it's an important focus. I would also say, yes, it's too narrow a focus. So, Bruce, you talked about how important Social Security is. The Congressional Research Service just came out with some information, cited that nearly 1 in 5 people age 65 and above, Social Security is 90% or more of their income. And that is higher for, vulnerable groups. It's, those who are old or those who aren't married, including those who are widowed and racial minorities. So as you said, Bruce, absolutely critical that we make sure that Social Security continues and is there for people as their lifeline. But yes, it is also too narrow a focus because for most people, Social Security is not going to be enough. So I think for those of us in this retirement space, helping to solve that retirement income puzzle, from my perspective, it's yes, Social Security is important, and yes, it's too narrow of a focus.
Yeah, I think Bruce and Connie covered it really well here. I definitely agree. It's the key pillar in our so-called three-legged stool. So if that really goes away and changes dramatically, people lose faith, that's a big problem. But of course, we do need to keep focus on all levers to encourage retirement security.
Well, how do you think the Academy can assist policymakers to find solutions? And given the state of partisanship in DC currently, does that present an extra challenge?
It's one thing to offer ideas. It's another thing to get people to focus sufficiently on those ideas and on the solutions. We've had a lot of good engagement with policymakers, staffers. I'd like to see us do all we can to raise the temperature on this issue. It's already very late in the game, but the sooner that we address it, the less disruptive any solutions are going to be, and they're already going to be disruptive. As I said earlier, stabilizing Social Security, it's absolutely essential. Yes, there are certainly challenges. There's no way to get around the need for some combination of benefit reductions and tax increases, and I'm not optimistic that we'll easily find the right balance, the right consensus of what the appropriate combination is. But it's simply impossible to continue without some modification to the current promise. Across-the-board cuts would undercut retirement security, especially for those most vulnerable. More significant cuts targeted at higher income beneficiaries, might be considered more fair. But again, if those cuts are too significant, they risk undermining the broad public support that the system currently has. And so there really also has to be a significant revenue element. And as we continue to delay, the size of the problem grows, the price goes up, and so will the challenge of finding compromise. Whatever the solution, I'm afraid it's going to offer everyone something to be upset about. And that's really the challenge from a political point of view. You're probably not going to be a hero by wading in and really trying to solve this, but we really need some heroes. We need some people who are willing to take that on.
I agree. I like that. Can we turn up the temperature? I think also we can help best assist policymakers by remaining nonpartisan and building relationships. So this year was the first year I went on the visits to the Hill and visits to the congressional agencies, and I didn't really know what to expect, but I definitely came away with a couple of strong messages, which were that they really appreciated that we were there to help with no agenda, and that I also took away that they really were interested in our perspective. So I think in addition to turning up the temperature and helping move this forward, doing that while still remaining nonpartisan, building relationships is key to how we help policymakers move forward.
Yeah, just echoing, I think, Bruce and Connie here. I think they hit the nail on the head there. With respect to Bruce's point on Social Security, I think someone made a comment during our congressional agency visits. This was like a big topic. Social Security reform was a big topic when I started 25 years ago or something along those lines. So, we really need to focus on this as soon as possible. So continuing to provide that perspective to policymakers here at the Academy, I think that would be very helpful. And continuing to just be an independent resource to policymakers. So continuing to work on our various areas, different sectors in the retirement space, publishing and working on key issues that, very much matter to the, future of retirement security in the country. So I think we're trying to help policymakers, educate them and lead them, from our perspective, but we can hear all the different considerations.
Great. Appreciate that. I just want, before we go, to give everybody a chance to some final thoughts.
Yeah, really briefly, I just want to say one of the things that I find really encouraging is that so many thoughtful people engaging on the various challenges in the retirement area. And so, Social Security aside, I'd say retirement is a much less partisan issue than so many others. So that gives me hope. I think we'll be able to continue to make good progress in this area.
Yeah, I agree, Bruce. I think I do have a lot of hope. I do see progress. I see a lot of hope in being able to continue to make progress, and hope that the Academy will continue to be part of that conversation in moving that progress.
Yeah, thank you as well. From my perspective, it's been a pleasure to join. I am hopeful for the future. As Bruce and Connie mentioned, so many great discussions and ideas. So as retirement policy is generally bipartisan, pretty bipartisan, I hope to see more ideas that are out there and hopefully Social Security reform, we can get that done sooner than later. As actuaries, we know that is paramount.
Connie, Bruce, and Spencer, thank you all for your thoughts. Much appreciated today. Listeners can learn more about the Retirement Symposium by heading over to the Academy's Actuarially Sound blog and reading about it at www.actuary.org/actuariallysound. My name is Ted Gotsch, and I am pleased to have had the opportunity to host this episode of Actuary Voices, the podcast from the American Academy of Actuaries. Visit our website at actuary.org to learn more about all we do at the Academy. You can also follow us on X, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast at your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, be well.